Long before the child forms words, before reason awakens or the ego takes shape, there is the mother, not merely the woman who gave birth, but the psychological presence, the emotional atmosphere, the tone of safety or danger, the rhythm of touch, warmth, or withdrawal. She is not just a person, but a primordial symbol, the first image the unconscious assigns to life itself. To the infant psyche, the mother is not seen as separate. She is the world. She is the source of nourishment and protection, but also the mirror through which the self begins to see itself. Her eyes are not just eyes, they are reflections. Her voice is not just sound, it is the shaping force of internal dialogue. The mother archetype is thus far more than biology. It is a psychic blueprint, a symbolic pattern that leaves its mark in the deepest layers of the soul. If the mother was warm and consistent, the unconscious records the world as a place that welcomes existence. If she was cold, absent, or chaotic, then existence is branded with danger and unpredictability. From this early contact, or lack thereof, a myth is born in the child's unconscious, a myth about love, worth, safety, and self. And yet, it is not the actual mother who defines this myth entirely, but the inner image we form of her. Even the most present mother can become the source of confusion, guilt, or inner division, if the child misreads her silence or interprets her suffering as personal failure. Conversely, a mother who wounds the child may still be idealized, elevated into sainthood within the psyche as a way to preserve attachment at the expense of emotional truth. This inner image of the mother, crafted from reality, fantasy, projection, and need, takes root so deeply that it governs emotional reactions long after childhood ends. Romantic partners are chosen based on its shadow. Authority is interpreted through its lens. Even God, to some, is felt as a maternal echo, either warm and embracing or distant and punishing. To confront the mother as archetype is to return to the very beginning of one's psychic life. It is to look into the well from which all later relationships were drawn and to ask, not with judgment, but with honesty, what did I receive and what was I made to live without? This is not a path for the faint-hearted, for to see one's mother clearly is to risk the shattering of innocence and illusion. But it is in this shattering that the true self, long buried beneath borrowed myths, begins to emerge. Every child begins with a hunger for a perfect mother, a being of boundless warmth, unconditional approval, and unfailing presence. This yearning is not selfish, it is survival. The infant cannot distinguish between self and other, between inner hunger and outer reality. And so, the mother becomes everything. She is the first God, the source of life and the shield from death. But no human mother can fulfill this ideal, for she too is human, wounded, unfinished, shaped by her own invisible history. And so begins the great fracture, the split between the mother who is and the mother who was needed. Rather than face this fracture, the psyche constructs a defense, idealization. We build a false image of the mother, a holy mask to protect the fragile bond. We tell ourselves she did her best. We suppress the nights of silence, the coldness in her eyes, the manipulation in her tone, the subtle abandonment that had no name. We forget the emotional games, the conditional love, the guilt that was handed down like a sacred heirloom. Instead, we preserve her as sacred, because to question her feels like betrayal, and to betray her feels like death. But this preservation comes at a cost. The shadow grows. Everything we could not say, everything we were afraid to feel, is buried beneath the statue of the good mother. It festers there, in the unconscious, becoming rage, self, doubt, and inner conflict. We may become overly compliant, seeking to win love by being small, or we rebel against all authority, haunted by the original wound. Some of us repeat her patterns, not because we admire her, but because we have never dared to see her clearly. The shadow of the mother is not simply her cruelty or neglect. It is the lie we tell ourselves to maintain the illusion. It is the voice that says you're ungrateful for questioning her, or you owe her your silence. It is the inherited guilt that whispers she gave you life, you owe her your soul. This internalized voice becomes a jailer, keeping the child self-imprisoned, preventing the adult from stepping fully into truth. And the tragedy is this: when we deny the darker aspects of our mothers, we do not honor them, we freeze them in time. We do not give them the dignity of being whole people. We turn them into symbols and worship shadows. True reverence comes not from idealization, but from integration, to see the mother as she was, both light and dark, both giver and taker. But this vision is frightening. It threatens the foundation upon which our emotional world was built. It dares to ask, what if the one who was supposed to love me unconditionally could not? The answer to that question is the doorway to liberation, but it is a door few are willing to open. And so they remain, adults with the inner world of a child, forever seeking love from someone who may have never known how to give it, until they turn inward, until they name the shadow, until they reclaim what was once surrendered in the name of survival. Anger toward the mother is one of the most forbidden emotions in the human psyche. It is not simply culturally taboo, it is existentially destabilizing. To feel anger toward the one who gave you life, the one upon whom your earliest survival depended, is to tear at the very roots of being. And so the psyche buries it, not because it is absent, but because it is too dangerous to name. The child who feels hurt by the mother does not often scream. It hides. It rationalizes. It internalizes the failure as its own. She must have been tired. Maybe I was too needy. She did her best. These are not merely thoughts. They are psychic defense mechanisms. Because to speak the words "she failed me" is to awaken the pain of abandonment, to risk the loss of belonging, to step into the raw wound of unprotected vulnerability. It is easier to suppress the rage than to face the terror beneath it. But what is repressed does not vanish. The psyche is not a graveyard. It is a field. Everything planted in it grows. The unspoken anger becomes a root system, twisting beneath consciousness. It feeds on silence and blooms in strange places. In self-sabotage, in passive aggression, in sudden outbursts, in the aching need to be validated by those who resemble her in tone, in energy, in emotional inaccessibility. Repressed anger toward the mother often disguises itself. It wears the costume of perfectionism. If I'm good enough, maybe she will love me now. Or it hides in chronic people pleasing. Don't upset anyone. Don't be like her. Don't need too much. It can manifest in relationships that feel unfinished, always trying to resolve something old with someone new. It can even turn inward, transforming into shame, depression, or self-harm, because the child would rather blame itself than admit the unbearable, that I was hurt by someone I needed. What makes this anger so difficult to access is not just its depth. It is the guilt that surrounds it, guilt for even feeling it, guilt reinforced by society's glorification of motherhood, by religious teachings that place her next to divinity, by cultural narratives that forbid complexity in maternal figures. And so the anger remains stuck, lodged in the body, wrapped in silence, pulsing beneath every unmet need. To heal, this anger must be honored, not exiled. It must be allowed to speak, not for revenge, but for release, because beneath the anger lies the truth. I needed something, and I didn't get it, not in hatred, but in grief. Not in blame, but in clarity. To reclaim this anger is to reclaim power. It is the turning point where one stops asking, "What was wrong with me?" and begins asking, "Why was I never allowed to feel this?" And yet, most run from it. They protect the mother's image like a sacred relic, even as their inner world withers from the weight of unexpressed pain. They perform forgiveness like a ritual, hoping that spiritual bypass will silence the storm. But forgiveness without anger is counterfeit. It is a mask worn over a wound that still bleeds in the dark, until one dares to go there, until one allows the truth to erupt like fire after centuries of ice. You are not the beginning, you are the continuation of a line, ancient, invisible, unbroken. Your mother did not emerge from a void, and neither did you. She too was shaped by the woman who came before her. And that woman by another. Wounds travel. They migrate silently through generations, not always as visible scars, but as patterns, emotional blueprints etched into the unconscious long before you were born. The pain you carry may not have started with you. Your anxiety may be your grandmother's. Your fear of abandonment might echo your mother's first heartbreak. The silence that cloaks your home may be the voice your great-grandmother was never allowed to raise. These emotional legacies move like a subterranean river, flowing beneath the surface of family life, unseen but deeply felt. The child does not question these waters. It drinks from them. It learns what love looks like by how the mother expresses it or withholds it. It learns what is safe to feel, what must be hidden, what earns closeness, and what brings rejection. These lessons are rarely taught directly. They are absorbed through tone, through gesture, through absence. Through the quiet way a mother turns away when tears rise, through the way she clenches when anger enters the room, through the heaviness she carries without speaking, you inherit not just your mother's features but her fears, not just her wisdom but her wounds, and because so much of this is unspoken, you grow up believing it is yours. Your depression, your guilt, your inability to receive love. But often, these are not personal failures. They are emotional inheritances. Transmissions from a lineage that never had the tools or language to process their pain. The mother becomes the vessel of this lineage, not by choice, but by momentum. She passes on what she was given unless she becomes aware enough to transform it. Most do not. They love as best they can, but they love through the filter of what was modeled to them. And so, you become the next link, the next bearer of burdens you didn't choose but now must reckon with. To face this is not to blame. It is to illuminate, to say, this did not start with me, but it must be seen by me. You must become the one who names what was once unnamed, who speaks what the women before you were not allowed to speak, the one who breaks the sacred silence of suffering, not out of rebellion, but out of reverence for the truth. But this is no easy task. The psyche resists. The family resists. There are myths that must be protected, stories that are too fragile to disturb. And so, many continue the cycle unknowingly, raising children while carrying unresolved grief, masking their pain as strength, calling survival love. They hand down trauma as tradition, mistaking emotional suppression for maturity. To break this chain is to become an outsider in your own family narrative. To stop the wheel turning, you must stand in the place where lineage meets choice. You must be willing to feel what they could not. You must be willing to mourn not only your own wounds but theirs, because healing is not just personal, it is ancestral. It is the moment a single individual stands before generations of silence and says, "It ends with me." And yet, even this decision does not make you free. The cycle does not vanish simply because you see it. The inheritance lingers, in dreams, in triggers, in the voices that rise within when you try to choose differently. You may find yourself reliving their emotions in your own relationships, drawn back into the very dynamics you swore you'd escape. Because the past does not let go easily. It asks to be felt. It demands to be honored. You may have left her house. You may live in another city, speak new languages, carry new titles, raise children of your own. And yet her voice follows you, not in the physical sense, not always in phone calls or letters, but in the mind, in the quiet between decisions, in the moments of self, doubt, of guilt, of praise withheld. It rises like a ghost, not her voice as it once was, but her voice as it was internalized. This is the inner mother voice. It is not your mother's actual speech, but the emotional tone your psyche absorbed as truth. And it is powerful because it began when you were too young to defend yourself, before you had language to challenge, before your ego had formed a stable boundary. Her words entered as law. A glance, a sigh, a withheld embrace. They became instructions about who you are and what the world expects of you. The psyche, in its infinite complexity, does not record these moments as memories. It records them as realities. The mother's disappointment becomes "I am not enough." Her anxiety becomes "the world is not safe." Her conditional love becomes "I must earn approval." These fragments form an internal narrative, and over time they crystallize into a voice that criticizes when you rest, a voice that shames when you feel desire, a voice that warns you not to speak too loudly, not to dream too boldly, not to need too deeply. It calls itself discipline or humility or being realistic, but it is not. It is an echo of her own pain, now living inside you, masquerading as your conscience. This voice governs more than you realize. It shapes your self-image. It influences your romantic choices. It interferes with your creativity, your freedom, your capacity for joy. You may believe you're afraid of failure, but in truth, you may be afraid of her imagined judgment. You may think you're chasing success, but you're actually chasing her approval, even if she's no longer watching. The great tragedy is that most people never recognize this voice for what it is. They call it me. They live their entire lives obeying a psychic script written in childhood, never realizing they can rewrite it. They carry out silent contracts with a mother who may never have understood her own pain, let alone yours. Contracts like, "I'll never surpass you," or "I'll stay small so you don't feel abandoned," or "I'll carry your sadness so you feel less alone." But the psyche is not fooled forever. At some point, often during a moment of rupture, a heartbreak, a creative block, a panic attack, the inner mother voice becomes too loud to ignore. The soul begins to rebel, and yet, even then, the guilt returns. Guilt for questioning her, guilt for wanting more, guilt for wanting to live a life untouched by her fear, her shame, her quiet despair. This is the tyranny of the inner mother voice. It binds not through cruelty, but through loyalty, through the invisible thread of emotional allegiance. To untangle from this thread is not an act of betrayal, but an act of becoming. Yet it feels like betrayal. It feels like exile. Because the part of you that formed under her gaze still believes love means obedience, still fears that separation is abandonment, still confuses guilt with goodness. So you censor yourself before anyone else does. You suppress your brilliance before it can threaten the equilibrium. You fold yourself into the shape that pleased her most, even when she's no longer looking. You become both child and jailer, imitating her voice in your own mind, punishing yourself in her absence, upholding a sentence she never had the words to revoke. The journey toward the self begins with a fracture. Not the violent kind, but the essential kind, the separation of what you were given from who you truly are. And at the center of this psychic division stands the mother, not merely as a person, but as an archetype. She is the first mirror, the first environment, the first interpreter of reality. Through her eyes, the child first sees itself. Through her emotional weather, the child learns to navigate its inner world. And so, to separate from her is not simply to step away from a parent. It is to step away from the original definition of reality. This is why the path of individuation is so perilous. It is not rebellion for rebellion's sake. It is not selfishness dressed as freedom. It is a sacred dismantling, a disintegration of inherited beliefs, roles, and emotions that were never truly yours. To individuate is to untangle your soul from the web of unconscious loyalty. It is to turn inward and ask, what part of me is actually me, and which parts were given, imposed, absorbed? Before I had the chance to choose, but the mother archetype does not release easily. She clings in the psyche, not only through memory, but through the moral weight she carries. She becomes the inner commandment. Do not stray too far. Do not forget who made you. Do not hurt me with your becoming. These commands are rarely spoken aloud. They live in dreams, in hesitation, in the aching guilt that arises when you begin to live in contradiction to her values, her fears, her unlived life. For some, this separation begins with anger, all vital, necessary. For others, it starts in silence, the slow recognition that what once felt like safety now feels like suffocation. In either case, it is never clean. The soul does not cut ties without cost. There is mourning here, a grief that cannot be articulated in language. You are not just losing a relationship, you are shedding an identity, the version of you that kept her company in her sadness, the version of you that played small so she could feel large, the version of you that remained a child so she would never feel alone. And yet, the deeper truth is this: to remain fused with her is to deny your own becoming. As long as you carry her unprocessed emotions as your own, you cannot see the world clearly. As long as you make her approval your compass, you will walk in circles. As long as you fear her disapproval more than you fear the abandonment of your own soul, you will live a borrowed life, one that fits her wounds, not your truth. Individuation demands psychic separation, not physical distance. It is possible to live continents apart and still be emotionally enmeshed, and it is equally possible to live side by side with your mother and yet no longer carry her fears as your own. This is the subtle work, the inner divorce from the mother complex, the conscious refusal to let her voice override your own, the courage to feel the guilt and still choose authenticity. You do not cease to love her by separating. You cease to abandon yourself, but the child within you may not understand this. That child still believes that love means sameness, that loyalty means silence, that stepping into your own power is a betrayal. This inner child must be gently led, not forced, into a new reality, one where love includes truth, one where connection does not require contraction, one where honoring the mother means seeing her as she truly is, not as the sun around which your life must orbit, but as a flawed human woman who, like you, inherited wounds she never asked for. And in this moment of recognition, something ancient begins to dissolve. The projection fades, the pedestal crumbles, the fog of obligation lifts, and for the first time, you begin to sense what has always waited beneath the surface of your becoming, the pulse of your own soul, wild, sacred, and untouched by the chains of inheritance.